movies, what we're going to do is, this is your program. We want questions, we want stories from you people. We know what all of this material is, but we want to hear what you people have to say about the movies in Maynard. Sam Savella's wife told me a story one day, and I thought it was pretty cute. It's so nice that when I go into the fourth graders and the fifth graders at the school department, I tell them this story. Back in the late 30s, early 40s, she used to go to the movies. Of course, she lived in Acton. There were no theaters in Acton, but there was 3 theaters in Maynard. So her mother would give her 50 cents on a Saturday afternoon. The little bus went over to Lowell, so she rode the bus to Maynard for 10 cents. Here's some of the family from the bus company right here. Went to the movies, 10 cents. Went to the movies, probably got a candy bar, another 2 cents. Probably went to one of our many drugstores, probably Johnson's or McCurdy's or somebody like that. Got a frap, another 10 cents. She went back to Acton on the bus. At the end of the day, she probably had a nickel still left in her pocket. So, I mean, we can't do that today. If I'm not talking loud enough, it's Roy's fault, because he didn't put the mic up. Actually, we're not going to talk about how movie pictures came from, where they started, or anything like that. We need 3 nights, 4 nights, to tell you all about the motion picture.
They
Can't hear? I'll go to the back. So, can you hear me now? Because I'm soft-spoken. Thank you. Movie pictures were first introduced to the town, sponsored by the Epworth League at Riverside Cooperative Hall on Thanksgiving night, 1902. They were shown by Salisbury's high-class movie picture company, and then the next show was in St. Bridget's Church, 1903, March. Passion Play. From then on, motion pictures were shown at music hall, probably once a month, by various movie pitching companies and so forth, and sponsored by local societies, organizations, whatever was around at the time. In November 1909, Maynard was treated to the first showing of a pictures by a concern called the American Movie Picture Company. And was at the music hall, or the rink. The rink, as all the old timers know, was on the end of Main Street where Tuttle's bowling alley was, if anybody my age remembers. We had a fire there too. A former resident of Maynard, who is now deceased, Henry Gilroy, was associated with a man named Sherman, who was showing pictures in other towns. Gilroy severed his connections with Sherman and started to operate at Cooperative Hall, also in Associate Hall, in Concord Junction, now West Concord, and stated he would have the latest talking device which had just come on the market, and also stated he would have only the best. In 1910, he bought the pictures of the Nelson Walcott fight. You have a picture here of some of the different fights and so forth that came to Maynard and other paraphernalia, if you want to see what's up here. In May 1913, new chairs were put in Cooperative Hall to replace the old, they call them settees, which had been in use for many years. Gilroy had procured 2 brass signs, 30 by 40, with glass fronts to use in the advertising for his theater. In 1913, Edison's greatest achievement, talking pictures, was shown at Cooperative Hall, including Raymond Hitchcock singing his favorite song, What's the Use? This was the first time that the town the size of Maynard has been affected by talking pictures. This being confined to the Keith Circuit and other larger cities, Boston, etc. Prices for the show, 10 cents. for children, 25 cents for adults. The same picture cost 50 cents at a Keith Theater, which ran in your major auditoriums. Can you hear me, Roy? 1914, B.J. Coughlin, George Creighton commenced to install booths and fixtures in the new Naylor Hall. That was over the 5 and Dime, which had just been completed. The fixtures arrived and were being installed to be ready at the Colonial Hall. The first show was Battle of Shiloh. Of 4 reels, and James Farrell, Maynard's popular tenor, sang. He was engaged to sing for the opening. The operators of the pictures were Leonard Smith, and a piano player was Bert Lawton. Chief of Police John Connors was to be present to keep order. The new picture was then open to Tuesdays, Fridays, and Saturday evenings with a matinee for the children on Saturday afternoon. Letters. March 20th, 1914. His store advertised 100 tickets to the movies free for the first 100 children who came to his store after 1 p.m. on Saturday. 500 kids showed up. 1914, the Colonial Theater had a singer from Boston. On Thursday evening, Tom King was the singer. Saturday, James Farrell and Arthur Sullivan was the soloist. On Saturday afternoon, $2.50 gold piece was given away and a $5 gold piece at the evening. Henry Gilroy, the movie man, claimed that on Saturday afternoon he had the largest attendance at a matinee any show or program he had put on. 1914, October 9th, work was commenced to change the hall in Haynes Block, that's Groover's, Riverside Hall, so that it could be used for a moving picture theater conducted by none other than Samuel Laird. In May 7, 1915, Maynard Brass Band gave a concert and moving pictures at the Colonial Hall. On the 15th, Hugh Connors was the soloist. August 13th to 15th, with the approval of the selectmen, Riverside Hall was allowed to open as a movie theater September 1st under the management of B.J. Coughlin. We do have his obituary up there, and we do have some of the other brochures and so forth from his movie theater. We also have some of the other brochures that, if you pay attention to them, Mrs. Graham in 1928 went to the movies, Marlboro, got hit by a door. She died. She was from Maynard. 1920, in March, 2 show houses projected, stock on sale, New People's Theater. Ground was broken by a mutual development company for foundation on a lot fronting the store of B.F. Townsend, because B.F. Townsend's store is gone. Price of shares, $25. Businessmen participated, and it was to be built beside the P.H. DeLee's drugstore, which happened to be next door to where the People's Theater today, the present building, the People's Theater, was built. There was a discussion of, there was 2 different groups were vying for a theater, a new theater in town. One wanted to put it on Main Street, one wanted to put it on Nason Street. The reason they wanted it on Main Street, because that was the main attraction, but it ended up being on Nason Street, number 14. I happen to, as people locally in town, I happen to rent that building as a part of my business for 5 years, and had quite a few people used to stop at the door and so forth and saying, geez, I'll bet you this was a movie theater, and how right they were. Let's see where we are at here. An announcing organization of People's Theater Companies signed by James Coughlin, Hector Roberts, and James J. Ledger. April 9th, 1920, People's Theater started selling Mutual has decided on a corner on Main and Nason better for their theater. 47 feet front, 120 feet depth. House occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Coulter to be moved as far as the post office. Entrance to be on Main Street. Didn't happen. April 16th, People's Theater Company purchased land from P.H. DeLead between drugstores of McCurder and DeLead. The rival theater acquired the lot on the corner of Main and Nason. Both parties were busy with their plans and architects. September 1920, both parties finally decided to merge. That was the end of all the bickering. Mutuals decided to purchase shares in the People's Theater. 6 directors were elected, which included 3 from each group, and about 35% were held by other groups. That's the shares. In May 6, 1921, People Theater opened with a large attendance, seating 700, 250 in the balcony. In March 17, 1922, Sam Lera has offered to help Maynard High School Athletic Association by allowing them all the profits from the candy sold at his new movie picture theater, which opened on Wednesday, called the Riverside Theater, 400 seat capacity. We had one now for 700, now we're going to have another one for 400. Starting off with 3 pitches, 3-piece orchestra and pitches in hope to continue their service. For instance, in 1922, an ad to the Riverside Theater, Hell Divers, starring Wallace Reed, the Country Fair, Wesley Barry, Helen Eddy, and 2 reels, Westerns. Man from the Lost River, a 2-reel comedy. 3-piece orchestras now were at the People's Theater. Now, the People's Theater went on and survived until the 1950s. Mr. Coughlin also had the People's Theater. He also owned, or his dad owned, another business over on Summer Street. I'll get to that in just a minute. Some of the things that they did to entice people to come into the shows, they gave away dolls, carriages, bicycles, athletic equipment, silverware, gave away tickets to the World's Fair. I think Benny won one of them. Unfortunately, in 1934, July 14th, a fire at the Riverside Hall, the movie theater burned down. There are pictures up front of the fire and Googles. The whole top of the building, the whole back of the building burned. Another interesting thing in this picture is J.J. Newberry's. There are also some pictures here of the furniture business inside. They're not very clear pictures, but you can see the furniture, the mattresses, and everything else. Pretty tough shape. It was a pretty extensive fire, and of course they never really rebuilt the building back to what it really was. And that building going back to the 1850s. Fine Arts Theater. I have a nice lengthy article out of one of the local papers on the Fine Arts Theater. Everybody knows at one time or another it was a horse stable. Art Gallery's latest edition, which lures people of culture. Interesting story of the transition of a Maynard stable to the present Fine Arts Theater, 21 Summer Street. From trotting horse stable to automobile agency to Fine Arts Theater and an art gallery. In the transition of an old barn that traces in search for the owner of a career of unleashed talents. That was the son, of course. The Fine Arts Theater in this town was a trotting horse corral when Burton Coughlin's father was owner and operator. But the younger Coughlin had different ideas. His early tendencies towards the fine arts was displayed when he fixed himself a radio listening antenna in the loft, all with the wood comforts and so forth, and he wanted nothing to do with the automobile business or the horse carriage business. Well, the trotting horses gave away to the automobile agency downstairs. They sold Maxwell's, Buicks, Fords. Bert Coughlin was attending Huntington School in Boston, preparing for Mass Institute for Technology for an anticipated career in the servicing of motor cars. At school, Burton did some drawings for the year, took some over to a teacher, suggested Museum of Fine Arts. He's wasting his talents, should be there. And he also helped set up a commercial art studio at 13 Fayette Street in Boston. But one day his father asked him to take over full management of the business, which he did, and that was of the People's Theater on Mason Street. Because his father at that particular time had now bought an interest in the business. The man Burton replaced never came back, and after his father's passing, Burton decided to give up the automobile agency, raise the roof, put up a new building, and using his own design, turn it into theater for the discriminated viewer. What he was trying to do is he was trying to entice the clientele from Acton, Concord, and all the other surrounding towns, the people that weren't coming to the flicks or the movies or whatever you want to call them. Since opening on June 29, 1948, his Fine Arts Theater has proved a wonderful success. Once or twice, Mr. Coughlin has arranged for exhibits of paintings and so forth in the exhibit, in the entrance. There is a wonderful picture right here of the original entrance. You get it? For the Fine Arts Theater. Do everybody remember what it looked like?
Right.
And by the way, a lot of these pictures we have here, if it wasn't for Samuel's studio in Maynard, a lot of these things we wouldn't have today. And that family, we owe a lot of credit to them. Because if it wasn't for the Michigay family, a lot of our history we wouldn't have. The Fine Arts Theater turned out to be one of the best cinemas, or one of the best hot spots, people coming up from Boston and everywhere else. But Mr. Coughlin still had his urge for art. So he was going to open up a place in Boston, but decided, we have this wonderful parking lot on Summer Street. I have this wonderful off space upstairs that I'm not using. It's not going to cost me anything. So he ended up putting up the gallery up over the theater. And to the day, the Fine Arts Theater is the only theater we have in town. I'm not going to bore you with any more of these because I know Benny has some wonderful, wonderful stories and things he's going to tell us. But I do have to read you something I found in the paper. And I'm doing this with Benny's blessing. July 24, 1935. Benny Sofka wins medals for swimming. Benny Sofka, crack usher at the People's Theater, won the life-saving contest at Lake Waldron and was given a medal. He then entered the 100-yard relay race. Guess what? Won another medal. About then, one of the officials requested, Benny doesn't compete anymore. Give somebody else a chance. It gets better. Already inquiries from young ladies have been coming to the theater or phoning the theater, wanting to know the time of the morning Benny takes his daily dip at the Concord Lake. It appears as though Benny is about to have his hands full, or whatever you want to say, his arms full. But I thought that was cute. Yeah. Benny had never seen it, didn't remember it at all. But Benny did tell me another story, because when he was in the theater business, or working in the theater, they were invited to, where did you go on a sabbatical somewhere with the theater?
I think it was near Nantasket Beach. They had these shoreline trips out of Boston to Nantasket Beach, and then there was another place next to Nantasket Beach.
But the gist of the story is they had another swimming competition, Guess who won the medal? You're on, Benny.
It was a smoking stand.
You want a smoking stand? You're up, Benny.
I feel embarrassed about that because that's the first time I heard about that yesterday. You showed me.
I'll pass it around.
Well, I hope you can understand my talking tonight because I'm just getting over a cold. I still have a cold, so bear with me. And some of these informations and dates and places and names may not be accurate because it's a long time since I dwelled into this story about Usher and Maynard. So I'll start off with, I used to live on one railroad street. The engine always stopped in front of our house. The freight cars were at the unloading station where the economy quality cleaners, is it now? That used to be the railroad station. And the American Express used to drop off the films for Maynard at that location. It comes from Boston, from some film district areas. So I noticed that the American Express was delivering these films, and I found out where they were going to the Rialto Theater. And American Express, it wasn't a credit card then, it was an actual delivery company. So my talk's about the Rialto Theater, Colonial Theater, and the Strand Theater. The Maynard Theater I don't know too much about. Maybe I was away or I was interested in the Strand Theater operations. So the Rialto Theater was on Main Street, for the people that don't understand exact location, where Gruber's Brothers furniture store is right now. Next to the right would be the entrance to the theater. It was upstairs, second floor. And at the foot of the stairs was Farnell's Bakery, an Englishman that operated that. So as you went up the stairs, you would be greeted by William Leonard, who was either the manager or operator. I was about 12 years old when I started picking up seats, as they called it, in the old days. After the show was over, somebody had to come up and pick up the seats, and so there'd be people able to walk through the rows. So he was either the manager or the owner. And his wife, Mary Leonard, was the organist at the Rialto Theater, and she also played for the silent movies that they had there at times. And also on that second floor was the tax collector. I think, what was his name? I forget now anyway, town employee. And in addition to my picking up seats, I would get them movies for nothing. Well, that I like. And also, as you see those posters back there, we used to call them window cards. And we'd go deliver the attractions at the theater, at the barber shops and different shops, and we'd leave a free pass with the owner so he could go see that movie or any movie. With bills, programs, coming attractions, we call them bills, we'd peddle the bills. Some other young fellows and myself would go house to house or certain areas in town and deliver these bills, but they're actually programs of coming attractions to the theater. They had vaudeville also at the Rialto Theater. And I happened to be there one morning, and there was this magician that's supposed to appear the next day. And he was telling some person what he's going to do, and he's going to call him from the crowd, and they're going to be amazed what he can do with this person. So I have a different opinion about magicians these days. The first talkie, I think, was at that theater, I'm not sure. The Jazz Singer with Al Jolson, I think it was in 1927, but I'm not sure if anybody can correct me on that. I'll stand corrected. The first talking pictures that came out was like a record, and it'd be synchronized with the movements on the screen. So that was a talking picture. And later on, the development of sound on film, the impressions were on a film, and it was all synchronized with the movements of the person on the screen. Okay, that's about it on the Rialto Theater. Colonial Theater was on 52 Main Street, where 5 and 10 used to be, where video rental lately was. It was. And the projectionist that we have, oh, I'm sorry. Get back. Strand Theater, after the Rialto was the Strand Theater. And there was a man by the name of Ken Forkey, who either was owner or manager. I was too young to know what it was, but I was an usher there. And I don't know whether Josephine Stuka was a cashier there at the Colonial Theater. I'm mixed up on that. And that's one of the theaters that Paul mentioned, that they used to give giveaways, dishware, or you come one night to get a saucer, the next week you'd come, it'd be the quiet nights of the week, usually the middle of the week, so the people would come in attendance. And they also had foreign films at the Strand Theater. And like I mentioned to Roy tonight, there was one Finnish one, Woman of Niskavuri, and he says that was a play in Finland, so I remember that. And they used to send a man that represented the distributor for that film. He'd be with there and check on the receipts to make sure he's not losing out on the profit of the film. And usually the kids down front, we used to tell them. First 12 rows and first 8 rows down front. So if they were not listening to me, I'll get my flashlight out. You, out. And the serials, if you can remember the serials that used to come every Saturday afternoon, they'd either be Westerns or the Green Archer or the Lone Ranger or...
Captain Bible.
Yeah, that was one of them too. And they'd have a main feature, and then they would have the serial. And usually the program in most of these theaters at that time was you would have the newsreel. It'd either be Path A News, RKO News, or I don't know whether MGM had one or not. When I was still at the Strand Theater, Joe Sarapinko, a good friend of mine, was the chief usher at the People's Theater, and he always wanted me to go over there and work as an usher. So finally I took him on his word, so I left the Strand Theater and went over to the People's Theater. And later on, the Strand Theater was bought out by the People's Theater Company, and they changed the name to Colonial Theater. So the Colonial Theater was, that's where I got mixed up in. Colonial Theater was on 52 Main Street, above the floor of the 5 and 10 also, and the video rental. And the projections was Walter King and Vin Sims. Cashier was Isabel Kegris and Josephine Stuka. I think they both were there. Ticket takers were Theodore Jones and Mr. Keegan. And the ushers were usually from the People's Theater for the Colonial Theater. Some of the movies, the Western popular ones, would be like The Lone Ranger, Tom Mix, Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, Buck Jones. In fact, I think they have those at the Rialto Theater also. So I took Joe Sarapinko's invitation to join the ushers at the People's Theater. And that was class because I didn't have a uniform when I worked at the Strand Theater. And I always admired these ushers at the People's Theater. And when I went over there, they had these bell buttons, just like in the hotel in the cab. And then later on, they changed the uniform to a blue jacket and buttons and gray trousers. That would be the winter uniform. And in the summer, they had those Palm Beach outfits, bow ties and white jackets and white pants. And there's a few pictures of those there. As Joe mentioned, Bert Coughlin was the general manager. Joe Farrell was the ticket taker and house manager. Bert Lawton, projectionist, and he was an ex-piano player for silent movies. Fred Killaby was the projectionist, and I just met his niece here. Would you stand up and see who you are? There she is. That was his uncle. So we got a little connection with the movies in those days and today.
Who was it? Who was your uncle?
Fred Killaby. Over there, Joe Serafinka was the chief usher. Alice Donahue was the ticket cashier. The ushers, I'll name a few of them. Nick Kavlicek, Tom Gailey, Jim and John Creighton, Ed Carberry, Russell Jordan. And then we had usherettes over there too later on. And I know there was Rose Girls, Bain and Novick. They had other cashiers that came after Alice Donahue, Chris Personnel, Mary Shooter, Stella Stazuski, Claire Bedford, and one of the Punch Girls. And here's some of the incidents and notes that I noted when I was working there. One time Joe Farrell was looking out the lobby towards the street, and he called me over and said, "Look who's over there. That's Babe Ruth, alpaca coat, cap, going to a Priest Cafe." In Vivid. That was one of the interesting moments. And I couldn't understand. 35 cents downstairs, 40 cents in the balcony. That was the price about that time for a movie. It seemed like the people from Concord or some from Maynard that didn't want to be mixed with the lower class, probably the 35 centers downstairs would go upstairs and pay. And then there'd be these couples that are taking each other on date. We'd be smooching up there. Sometimes we'd have to take the flashlight. This is a good one. Joe Farrell, he was short and robust. I have a picture of him here if you can see afterwards, if you know him.
Yeah.
And he would always watch out for drunks. He didn't want the drunks to come into the theater. And sometimes they'd get by the ticket, the cashier would notice that there would be a drunk coming and she wouldn't sell him a ticket. So sometimes somebody would buy a ticket for the guy drunk or half drunk and he'd try to get into the movies. So Joe would see him coming into the lobby and with his stomach, he wouldn't put his hand on the guy, with the stomach. And one time I was working at night and I see these two guys come in. You know, usually you can tell people they come and they know where they want to go, and they stop right at the foot of the stairs going up to the balcony, and they were talking to each other. One went upstairs and the other one went downstairs in the lobby, in the orchestra area. And that it sounded strange to me to see something like that. The next day, the safe is robbed out of the office. The safe is down in front of the theater, down front near the pit, cracked open. So naturally, the police came around and asked if anybody knew anything about this and that. Jack Connor's, was it Chief Connor's son? He was a policeman, and he was in on that case. So I explained to them what I had seen the night before. So they took me to Rogues Gallery at the State Police in Concord. I had to go through a million pictures of ex-robbers or robbers per se to try to identify the person. There was some resemblance, but I don't know how they ever made out on it. The uniforms used to be tailored naturally for every usher, coming in different sizes, and there used to be two tailors that they'd send them to. Schwartz was a tailor, and Lobenstein and the Masonic Building. They're the ones that used to take care of our uniforms. And if you notice some of these pictures, we have floats, all these promotion gadgets and things that they used to have in theaters to try to get your attention to come to the theater or the movie. He used to, Bert Kaufman would get these models out of Boston, come in and they'd sit on the floats, and we'd either take part in a parade in Concord or around here or somewhere, going around advertising the movie. Like one of them would be the Palm Springs or something like that. And always notice people coming in, and some are very polite and some are sarcastic. That's human life, I guess. There used to be an old lady from Concord. Her name was Mrs. Woods. She was all gray hair and a black little kerchief around her neck, and she used to sit in the back row all the time. We got very friendly. She'd come on a regular basis to the theater. And one time she invited me to her house, and she wanted to show me her Dickens room, Charles Dickens, and she had one room with all Charles Dickens things in it. So that was one of the thrills. Oh, while I was at the theater working there too, Joe Farrell used to have something to do with the mail. I guess he had a side job besides the one in the theater. And he used to go to South Acton and pick up the mail and bring it to the Maynard post office. And he asked me to do it one time. He had something else. So he gives me the vehicle and a 38 caliber revolver. No bullets. Here I go to, I'm wondering what's going to happen if I get ambushed or whatever. But I guess the revolver was supposed to scare off any robbers, maybe. So I would pick up the mail and bring it to the Maynard post office.
How old were you then?
Oh, then that was my high school days, probably maybe freshman or sophomore. It had to be sophomore, probably. And we had several Sonia Henney films, and they were always a nice one for my mother. She always liked her. So whenever we had a Sonia Henney film, I'd bring her and have her come down and we'd go to movies. And luckily that the Boston Garden was having one of her ice shows. So I took her in to see the ice show up in the balcony, but she was so thrilled to see Sonia Henney in person. Pleasant memory. All the clergy in Maynard were always invited for free to come and see the movies anytime they wished. So I remember Father Jock and later on Father Frank and some of the Protestant ministers coming in. Fan clubs, I guess they still have them now. And of all the celebrities in the movies that I've seen on the screen, they just come and go. I like them, enjoy them very much. But somehow or other, Madge Evans kind of hit me. So I wrote, you always write for the picture, you know, for the star. And she sent me this picture. To Benny Sofka with wishes from Madge Evans. And then a little application slip. Madge Evans Fan Club, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Dues are 50 cents per year. Send money, order, or coin. Foreign, $1 yearly. Send American currency. So that's Madge Evans. Well, that's about the bottom line of these talks. The Maynard Theater I don't know too much about, like I mentioned. Anybody got any questions? Or, yeah.
Tell us about the Arizona.
Oh, gee, that's right too. I didn't put that in my notes. Did disappear? For birds. Yeah, I'm sure. The U.S. as Arizona, most of these motion pictures, they try to shoot them on location. And it just so happened I ran across the USS Arizona. So this picture, this movie, Here Comes the Navy must have filmed around that ship. And that is the ship that's at the Pearl Harbor Memorial that was sunk by the Japanese. So I think it's quite a coincidence that I have this. Any questions about it?
The 6 o'clock show,
Huh?
the 6 o'clock show at the People's Theater, wasn't it all the same price for that? To get in the balcony on the 6 o'clock show?
I don't remember the 6 o'clock.
But I remember halfway down, the younger people had to sit in front, and if you were with an adult or over 16, you could sit to the back.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Oh, another thing is, the ushers were very polite in those days. You don't get the service you get nowadays. When somebody would come in, how many? 5. Well, we don't have 5 together, would you care? 3 over here or 2 over there? Okay, so follow me, please. Excuse me, would you mind moving over these 2 people? Thank you.
Where was Riverside Theater located?
Riverside? Is that the one on top of the, the Knights of Columbus Hall is now there.
Can't hear it.
Wasn't that the Clock Hall?
That was the Riverside Hall. The Riverside
I
Hall.
worked at the theater and all the content guys came. People's theater upstairs. Megan and Dean upstairs, I was sitting down.
This is much later. How about the opening for Concord, when they filmed that movie in Concord? I think it was in the late 50s or early 60s. And they had to have a premiere in Maynard. Does anybody remember that?
Yes.
I wasn't here.
I spoke with Loretta Donovan this week, and she reminded me that at one point tickets were 9 cents. And they raised them to 11, and she says the kids nearly died.
I remember they were 5 cents.
And she said when the show was on up in the Colonial Theater, the people who were shopping in the 5 and 10 downstairs, you know, every now and then you'd hear the stamping of feet as the kids got excited.
Well, one other thing.
Who were there?
When they used to, before the show started, they'd have a person with a basket and different kinds of candies walking down the aisle, one aisle and down the other aisle. And later on in the People's Theater, they had a candy case as you come in the back of the seating area.
Then there were the phony palm trees at the People's Theater that added some elegance to the place.
Yeah.
Betty, I can remember when I was young. And Song of the South was the movie coming out. We had been promised for 2 weeks, you're going to go to the movies on a certain night. God, I got up like every other kid my age. I had the mumps. Saw the movie.
You did?
I go to school the next day, but
Anybody else get the mumps?
I'm sure half the town of Maine already had.
Oh, I remember something else too. We used to have trouble with some of the fellas from Concord and Maynard. They get rowdy during the show, talking loud or something like that. You ask them to be quiet so they won't annoy the people in the audience. They give you a hard time or something like that. So some of them I would come up. I was appointed as special police, I guess. They had to be a special cop in the theaters. You out. No question. This funny thing about this, about a month ago, I was introduced to a fellow from Concord. And when I said my name and my face and everything, he said, "You kicked me out of People's Theater." More than once.
Does that say special police on your
No,
badge?
just police. Police Maynard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I have a very simple, crude one. It's a special police.
they do?
And
They
the
didn't have them in those days,
Antiques
though.
Roadshow thought it was about like 1920, and he figured it was during some kind of festival or something. And so I thought maybe it was the same one.
No,
I mean,
this is what they have,
festival.
unless they have them now.
Benny,
Yeah.
Benny, I took piano lessons from the piano player in the Maynard Theater.
The Maynard Theater, huh?
Belmont.
Who
We
gave you
have
those?
quite a piano player.
Ruth Hamlin, was it?
No,
Hamlin?
no, I don't remember his name.
What? Yes.
Then when we bought our house in 1953, that was Lawton's house.
Right.
And upstairs in the attic was all his piano music for the theater. And of course, we threw it up the main and down.
Now, did Mr. Coughlin paint the Chinamen at Fine Arts Theater? At the front of the theater, did he paint that? The mural. The mural? By the way, that studio that he started at 13 Thayer Street in Boston is still in existence. That's still an artist gallery, so he really had influence.
And his ideas, he always wanted to have it feel like the Fine Arts, and a cafe next to it, like a French motif, which is, I guess it started off that way, and changed to Italian or something. That was his idea. A little cafe next to the theater.
Did you miss that as well, Tito Berge, and then it moved later to next to the Sam Studio?
Oh, yeah?
At one time in the 50s, they had town meetings at the People's Theater too. It was the largest place to hold a meeting.
They were planning the draft and sent out notices that you can volunteer for 1 year. So I told Bert Kaufman, I said, I knew my number was going to come up sooner or later, but I want to go now, so I'll get my year in, and they won't bother me. So in November 1940, I went in, signed up for 1 year. And a month before December 12th, well, in November of 1940, I was supposed to put in my application to get out. So they saw it coming December 7th by the time you get out and everything. So my year turned out to be almost 5 years. And then I came back to the theater for 3 more years and decided to go back into the service. So I left the theater and made a career out of the Army for 15 years.
And met your beautiful wife?
Oh, that's another story. It's the movies. Let's go to the movies. She used to come to the movies with the twins.
Mrs. Donovan also said to me that they had to go to the Colonial early, to get there early, because just before the time of the show, a flatbed truck would come from Stowe, Acton, or someplace loaded with kids that check all the seats, you know, so they had to get there early to make sure they got a good seat.
And there was a romance in the theater family you might know about. Isabel Kegris was a cashier, and Dick Maluski was an usher, and they got married while they were, I think it's still in the theater business. Oh, there's another thing that comes to my mind. On big pictures, they would send out what they called checkers. They were just like spies to make sure you're not jipping the film companies. So they would stand in the back of the theater and click every person that comes in with a numbering machine. And then they would check the receipts of the cashiers, make sure they jived. And one of the checkers was John Flaherty. Was I surprised to see him come one time? Doc Flaherty, he was one of the checkers.
Weren't they able to do it with the serial numbers on the ticket?
No, they would go by their clicker. They said, well, I took 500, 400 people, and what do you get on your, well, they could add them up by the numbers, yeah. So they're supposed to jive. So they would get a certain percentage of the picture. You couldn't buy the picture outright or rent it outright on some of these big pictures. So they would take a certain percentage, and they want to make sure they got their percentage.
You were in the service for what year?
Till 63.
In Marlboro, they had scrap metal drives where they would allow the kids to bring, on certain days, bring scrap metal when the trucks would be out front. And all you had to do was drop off a pipe or something of metal that they could use in the war effort to get into the movie theater free.
There is some articles there that Mills, was it, American Woolen Company, and even some of the fire departments and so forth on incendiary bombs and so forth. But there were free movies that were given, and of course the People's Theater, the Colonials, there was no charge and so forth. They just gave it over as a public service. But there are articles on the table that relate to that too. I mean, they did do a lot of things, a lot of good things for the towns.
Well, another thing on a day off, go to Boston, see a movie on a stage show. Busman on his holiday, riding the bus. Yes.
Where there was more than one theater, was there a lot of competition as to which picture you were going to get? I mean, how did they decide who was going to bring in
I
the...
think they did.
Was that the way it worked?
I think that's the way they did it, yeah. They would be getting the movies from a certain distributor, and maybe this other theater company would get it from somebody else. And maybe one couldn't get the other.
So how often did the movies change?
Well, it depends how good the movie would be. If it was a good movie, it'd be, several days. Or maybe one day if it's not, they didn't figure a picture would make much money, they'd have it for one day. I guess you could probably tell them from those window cards or posters back there.
Yes. The People's Theater, that's the building next to CBS, right?
Yes.
Is there any part of that that is, any theater part of that left at all, tucked up away? No? Nothing left?
The office is upstairs.
Yeah, I didn't know if they got it completely. Nothing?
Other than the building, it's a traditional 1920 style movie theater.
Yes.
Did the film ever break, or did it break?
Oh, yes. They had problems like that. There'd be weak points on the film. And then they used to have a signal bell system right near where the entrance to the theater would be, where you collected the tickets. There'd be a bell above there. And if you had a dark screen, maybe the projectionists were not paying attention, so you'd buzz to wake them up. And they, in turn, if they wanted something up in a booth, the errand or something, or they would buzz down from them. They had a buzzer in the office. Then later on, intercom systems.
People's Theater was one of the first ones to get good movies on.
Yeah, they have a good reputation. Yeah. I used to, the salesman would come to his office there, and boy, they would have some arguments. You could almost tell them to go in and keep quiet and disturbing the people listening to the, yeah, this is one of the arguments that the salesman drop off about pictures. Different ones that are coming. Manager Kennedy, Love, Piper, Anna Stewart. So they would send these to the salesman to drop off which pictures would be available.
Bert Coughlin also did something that, he started a theater guide. And of course, he would have gone to companies like Back Racks and so forth, advertise and pay for it. But he would advertise, then he would advertise his movies in it, and at the same time, somebody else would pay for the brochure. Yeah, Back Racks, so we are. So, but he had whatever was coming out, the movies, Ivanhoe. At the People's Theater, they had Martin and Lewis, and City Beneath the Sea, and so forth. But I mean, he was a pretty clever man. Murphy and Snyder, Short Chatters, and this actually is signed by Bert.
Well, if nothing, yes.
It's Bert's daughter that runs the People's Theater now.
His son-in-law runs it now.
His daughter is Mrs. Quinn.
Right.
And so how are these Kaufmans related to the Dodge Kaufmans?
None.
No,
Not at all.
No, I think John knew that. Aren't you related to Kaufman? Not, he's Kaufman.
Okay.
Yes.
Was there a rating system on the films, or was no such thing as a rating system at that point?
There was a rating system, but there was some movie czar. Hayes office, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't have art pictures in those days, like they do now.
You didn't have movies on the Sunday either, Saturday.
They didn't?
No, not on Sundays.
Yes.
I'm 57 years old, but I can remember probably 45 years ago, my grandmother and myself, she used to take me every Saturday afternoon to go see the cowboy movies. She used to love cowboy movies.
Yeah.
Well, we went to the Colonial Theater. It was like 6 cents to get in for myself, and entrance was probably her. And we got into the movie, we sat down, we always used to get there early, because like Roy says, be a big crowd there, so she'd want to make sure she had a seat. Well, we went in there, and we waited for about 15, 20 minutes, and nobody else came in the movie.
And some of those kids would run from the first rows.
Yeah, well, we went in, and the manager of the movie come over to my grandmother, and, you know, she could speak broken English. You could tell her, say, look at, I'm gonna give you 2 tickets to go to the People's Theater, because we can't afford to run the movie. So we go over to the People's Theater, which costs more money, I guess, to go into, right? Yeah, it's so ironic. Every Saturday afternoon, we used to have
They were great movies in those days, and when you look around at those, we call them stills that they used to put in the lobbies. You probably call them photographs or photos or whatever. We call them stills. And coming attractions, I don't know, previews, we call them trailers. They'd be added on to certain, a tourial comedy or something like that before the feature starts. You'd have the coming attractions, previews.
That usually throw in some short subjects like Joe McDoakes or Edgar Kennedy.
Yeah.
Or bands, some photos of bands. Kay Kaiser and his musical knowledge, that'd be a 2-reel or a 1-reel. Things like that. Rudy Valiant's orchestra. Yes.
2 things. The news that you got was generally a week to 2 weeks old. By the time they got the news reels to the movie theaters, so what you were seeing had already happened quite a while back. And the other thing that, I didn't grow up here, but in the town that I lived in, I know that the Catholic Church there critiqued the movies and rated them, because I had friends who could not go to movies. It was banned by the church to go to movies. So I don't know whether they did that here.
But the beauty about these movies is rather you saw the picture mentioned rather than seeing it in a newspaper, just a picture or a story about it. They'd have somebody narrating the incident, and it's live movie. So even if it was a couple of days, but they were pretty.
Yeah, the March of Times.
Yeah, March of Times, yeah, that was a regular. That's it.
Well, thank you very, very much, Paul.